Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with a test disc for our videos Shawscope Volume 4, releasing in December of 2025. Currently making my way through this mega 14 movie collection edition featuring Hong Kong cinema's most divisive films during the 70s and early 80s, with some more of their kind of practical, gorier films, kind of horror themes, sci-fi concepts, exploitation. Definitely a much more divisive, big mixed bag compared to some of the previous editions that have been out. And you know the score, guys, by now. I'm currently on disc 3 of the edition, and we're diving into Sleazy of 70s Hong Kong, which is Blackmagic 1 and Blackmagic 2. Very strange in terms of special features, not getting many on terms of these brand new editions. And one thing I will give it credit for, similar to the other previous releases I've talked about already in terms of the reviews, is that the brand new 2K transfers, the restoration work for our video, is incredible. It's really top notch. Definitely a massive upgrade in terms of the 88 releases. In fact, I have seen previously Blackmagic. So in actual fact, it gets to the most important aspect in terms of the actual disc, which is the actual feature film itself. Restoration work being really top notch in terms of the picture quality and the audio work. And the special features, while there is lacking in them, of course, the main thing is the film itself. So I think that is definitely the positive to go into. Now, James Munch does the part 1 in terms of the audio commentary, and Samantha Dankins does part 2. Similar to the previous disc, unfortunately, there's not many extras on this edition in terms of special features, just audio commentaries. Granted, with part 2, there is the alternative US opening of Blackmagic part 2, but that's about it. I imagine you will get a lot more information and extras potentially on the bonus disc or the booklet, which comes part of the edition itself, which might go a bit more behind the scenes and in terms of those kind of written essays. But so with that being said, let's dive into the feature films themselves, Blackmagic 1 and Blackmagic part 2.
第三样，要你的乳汁。
你开玩笑，我哪儿？
First one is Blackmagic 1, released in 1975, directed by Hu Ma, which previously has done The Oily Maniac, which I previously have reviewed. Terrible film, but he did direct it, and also has done The Flying Guillotine and Dragon Missile, which I've talked about The Flying Guillotine already, and a few of his movies on the channel previously to this edition. Definitely a very experimental, very fluid, open kind of director that's willing to kind of, you know, throw his hat in the ring and kind of, you know, get creative and do something quite different and wild, and not sticking to the same type of material, but definitely the go-to guy for the most wackier kind of films in his kind of filmography for sure, and Blackmagic is no exception to that. I don't know if this was the first of its kind. I don't believe they would be. I think there are movies previously to this, but would start, or at least be partially responsible for the kickstart of these types of supernatural black magic type movies that Shaw Brothers would eventually do, leading to more of the extremer ones from this edition and previous kind of 88 and other Arrow release films to this. This is like leading into something like Seeing with a Ghost and Boxer's Omen. I would say doing this double bill is actually quite difficult because, being the fact it is the same director, it has the entirely the same cast as well in terms of playing different roles, and has a slightly tweaked version of the same storyline in terms of part 1 and part 2. So I'm going to try my best to kind of separate my opinions on both and to kind of give you what I think of both films, and obviously you guys to join in the comments below to see what you think. And I definitely think I might be in the minority here in terms of these films, because I think both part 1, and I'll get into part 2 in a minute, is just fine. And what I mean by fine, I mean just fine. It's just, that's it. It's just inoffensive in some ways. It's just kind of like a concept idea that Shaw Brothers had. They want to experiment with kind of the horror themes, and they want to have a cool 70s kind of scoring, and they want to tease some bigger ideas, but they can't quite commit to it just yet, which is weird because Battle Wizard was much more kind of bombastic and strange and out there, but maybe it's more of a period film. And as mentioned within my Oily Maniac review, these are both 1 and 2 contemporary 70s setting movies. And again, it just takes away the magic, takes away that kind of energy about these films, and makes it more cheaper, just and tackier for me. And, you know, these are sleazy films, that, you know, but they're not exploitation films necessarily. I would clarify the difference on that in terms of being a sleazy film, being the idea is very hokey and just fantasy type thing, where like an exploitation film is really going for in terms of just the kind of the nudity or the violence and just kind of being very crude and kind of out there in terms of its material. To give you a very basic idea of the story, you've essentially got a bunch of people that are using a love potion or type of spell to basically use against each other, going back and forth, and that's the majority of what the film is. You've got a rich woman who is infatuated with T. Lung's character, which is an engineer, someone at a building site, and she's a widower. She's obviously very wealthy. She's got a lot of money, access to a house, and she just wants a specific man. And it's basically a hard to get kind of thing where, you know, T. Lung's character is getting married and he has no interest in this woman. And from Parme himself, Lolia, which is basically a bit of a drifter kind of character, a bit of a sleazeball, someone who is desperately trying to get her attention because he basically wants access to all that money and obviously trying to win her over, but it's not working. He goes to kind of a dark place in the middle of the forest and meets this kind of, you know, sorcerer, shaman, whatever you want to call it, someone who is doing a bit of a ritual and basically asks, hey, look, I want this woman to fall in love with me and, you know, I want to get a spell from you, essentially. And this does end up working to his favor, but only for one night, being the fact he hasn't paid up to the actual sorcerer and ends up kind of dying in the process down to the kind of the threat and the curse already placed upon him. But she finds out this in terms of the day after the fact, in terms of being basically exploited in that way, in terms of sexually. And she wants to kind of find the shaman, this kind of sorcerer, this evil kind of wizard type character, and basically use the same kind of potion. And she has access to more money this time around, and she's willing to offer a lot heavier sum to get kind of T. Lung's character to basically be under the spell of her for over a year. And that's interesting. And that's basically the back and forth. And as to be expected, these things do go right, but do go wrong. Obviously, the family that he was about to marry into obviously suspects something's wrong, and then there's a rival sorcerer involved as well, which is definitely steps up a little bit towards the third act. And obviously the sorcerer shaman character also falls in love with a rich woman and plants a kind of love potion on her as well. So you've got basically a series of backs and forth, going back and forth of this love potion for basically an hour and a half movie, with the bookends being the really cool opening kind of, you know, death kind of curse spell, which is pretty cool opening. And then the ending of the film is all set during the quarry, which has been set up during the start of the film, with T. Lung's character, and you get this kind of lightning show, kind of visual effects, kind of battle back and forth, and characters get their comeuppance as well, and it's a bit of a scramble back and forth over just infatuation and lust, essentially, and characters screwing each other over, literally and metaphorically as well at the same time. So it's just, that's what the film is. And, you know, after a second viewing, because I did do an initial viewing for it a long time ago, and I got into Shaw Brothers, didn't like it at all when I first watched it. I thought it was quite boring. This time around, I just kind of accept it. It's an acceptance, more of a second viewing than it is anything else. I didn't get more out of it. I understood what the film is. I understood more the actors and the director, and understood the genre a little bit more this time around, a bit more knowledgeable of these types of films. But I didn't get anything more out of it than I did before. It's very forgettable. It's very tamed for what it is. And at the very least, it is a bit more interesting compared to something like The Orly Maniac. It's a bit more consistent in terms of where it wants to go, and it sets some rules, and it has some interesting ideas in terms of the ritual and the ideas of, you know, I can put a curse on you in 3 days, or I can put a love spell on someone in 3 days. I need these specific things to make it work. I wouldn't say this film's essential viewing. I wouldn't say you have to watch this straight away in terms of this box set, but I think it is a curiosity in there in terms of these types of films, leading into the more bigger, more bombastic films that the Shaw Brothers later would do. And last for the disc, we have Black Magic Part 2, or just 2. On the actual disc itself, it is mentioned to be Part 2, even though it has nothing to do with the first one. It just happens to be in the same space. Basically, it's just a sequel by name only. It has all the same casting from the original film, but in different roles this time around in a slightly different location, and tackles some slightly different kind of themes, but cuts from the same cloth. I would say the second film is more or less the person copying your exam paper and can't quite see what they've done and just kind of copying and changing it. But in this case, in fact, it's the same director. He's literally copying his own script. He's got his own script right next to him, and he's just kind of rearranging it a little bit, and just instead of love potion, we'll do ghost zombies, and cashing in on the first one, doing another entry very quickly from the same director, having the entirely the same cast again, just switch around different roles. And you've got Palme this time around, the actor from the first one, basically playing the evil kind of black magic sorcerer, the shaman kind of character, which is basically got a mansion. He's got essentially zombie servants, and he's got a lot of wealth and influence and has a lot of control over that kind of town, just from the implication of it. And he is 80 years old, and he basically lives on female breast milk, essentially. And he maintains youth by kind of snatching women and using them for various different means, one being the kind of eternal life. And he's also a grave robber, which is kind of taking men and women, placing spikes in their head and giving them youth and control of them by capturing their ghost essence spirit within the body of these kind of deceased corpses. And he makes money off that in terms of, I guess, prostitution or whatever kind of muscle he needs kind of thing. And he's always on the look for something. He has certain type of abilities and control. He has controlling abilities, so he can kind of command people to come to him or make people forget, or he can curse people in very specific ways, and has similar kind of effects to the original one, which is in the first one as well, which has the same 70s kind of scoring music and the same kind of practical effects with the melting faces. And, you know, you've got our main characters, which are the ones from the original movies, but playing different characters this time around, being kind of scientists / doctors that have come to this town, this location, because of a very deadly, nasty diseases that are spreading throughout this entire town, very nasty burns and scarring. And there is no cure, there is no kind of salvation in this, because they don't know what's going on, they don't know what's caused this, and there's no scientific or medical reason for this to be happening, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And you've got the one character which believes in black magic and sorcery, and very skeptical and very superstitious of what's going on. And this leads to our main kind of confrontation towards the middle and third part of the film. In between this pretty cool idea that is stretched to its unbelievable limit, and the pacing is really suffering because of it. It has a pretty good first 20 minutes. Tries to do a sort of a rehash of the first one again, with similar kind of love potions, with this time sort of mind control, I guess, and tries to do that sleazy type of thing where characters are going, having affairs with each other or sleeping with each other, and padding a little bit. And it's kind of, again, keeping that budget nice and low, and, you know, allowing for some of the more bigger scenes, the more interesting scenes to kind of take place towards the third act. And it just becomes, again, a bit of a slug to watch. It gets a bit kind of muddled, and definitely feels very much a rehash of the first one, but just without the same type of focus. Has a really cool idea, but doesn't really fully commit to it. I'd say not as good as the first one, even though it does have better ideas, and it does have a more cooler main villain. And I do like the kind of the ritual side of it, but again, it's just kind of scratching at those ideas. It doesn't really fully go for it, and I think it could have been bigger. And I think the later Shaw Brothers films definitely go much more bombastic, much more kind of bigger and bolder, and get a lot more practical and gorier, and fully commit to its kind of spookier, nastier kind of magic and spirits and ghost type of ideas. These ones are relatively hold back concepts. It wants to be bigger, but Shaw Brothers won't allow it, because it wants these films to be relatively quite cheaper, I guess, maintained within its kind of specific locations, and to make that more bigger profits. And there's a reason why both these films were done back to back by the same director, most of the same cast, and has a similar kind of rehash type story. They're both products of its time. They both set out to do very specific things for the genre, for Shaw Brothers financially, and to pave the way for more bigger kind of horror films in that space. And I think just because they were the first of its type, whether it's the origin point or paving the way for the bigger ones, doesn't make it any less that what these films are. But as saying that, I do think part one and part two in terms of black magic will not be ones I'll be revisiting anytime soon. I definitely accept them for what they are. I understand what these films mean to people, and for me, they didn't gel, they didn't do much more. Battle Wizard, I think, is a lot more my jam, and I think there are other movies on this edition that I'm a lot more excited to see and check out as I go through this collection. So what are your thoughts and impressions on Black Magic 1 and 2? Which do you have a preference on your favorite? Am I completely wrong? Am I completely out of line? Are these like some of your favorite movies in this space? Comment down below, let us know your thoughts and impressions. So meantime, guys, I'm for reviews. Signing out.